views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Magandang gabi Pilipinas, Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. Welcome po sa panabagong edisyon ng ating programang Radyo Advokasya. Ngayon po ay January 11, 2024. Ako po si Jude Hicap hanggang alas 7 po ng gabi. Nasa pangalawang bahagi po tayo o part 2 ng ating talakayan. Ito po ay nasimulan natin kahapon hanggang ngayon at hanggang bukas para matapos po natin ang usapin ng visa application patungkol sa student visa, working visa, skilled visa, tourist and permanent visa in Australia. Kasabay po natin ang ating resource person sa ating pong programa from Australia, Attorney 𝗥𝗱𝗆𝘆 practitioner ng High Court, Australia. Attorney, pagbati po muna sa ating mga nakikinig at nanonood ngayon bago umpisahan po natin ulit ang ating mga pagtatanong sa inyo. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Jude. Good evening, everyone. Well, it's me again, 𝗥𝗱𝗆𝗆𝘆 from 𝗥𝗱𝗆𝘆 Lawyers Australia. Again, it's a pleasure to be back on this program, Jude.
Maraming salamat sa pag-sustain sa amin at importante na kasama po namin kayo sa ating talakayan para mabigyan po natin ng paliwanag at gabay ang ating mga kababayan na gustong pumunta at manirahan at magtrabaho po sa Australia. But then, gusto ko lang po munang batiin si Brother Martin Hariguab at ang opisina, dyan po naman sa bahagi po ng Sorsogon. Ano nga po yung pangalan ng opisina, attorney, dyan sa may bahagi po ng Sorsogon?
It's MCG
Consultancy.
Consulting and Business Solution Specialist.
Yes. Ayan, lahat po ng staff, no? Sa pangunguna po ni Sir Martin Hariguab, magandang gabi, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Mga kaibigan, no? Kasabay po natin ulit ang ating pong resource person na si Attorney 𝗥𝗱𝗆𝗆𝘆 para tayo ay gabayan sa iba't ibang mga katanungan natin patungkol sa iba't ibang visa kung tayo po ay pupunta ng Australia. Sa pagkakataon na ito, pag-uusapan natin, Attorney Cyril at mga kababayan, ang application ng working visa in Australia and skilled visa in Australia. Unang tanong, meron bang distinction itong working visa at skilled visa application in Australia, Attorney Cyril?
There is. The working visas, obviously, they are categorized under the employer-sponsored visa. There is an existing employer who's willing to sponsor you, and then when you arrive in Australia, there is a ready work for you. Whereas the skilled migration, it is on your own. You do all the English tests, the skills assessments, and then when you arrive in Australia, you have to find your own job. So that is the main difference between the two. And the skilled migration is a points-tested visa. So you have to meet the criteria, the age, education, work experience, English. You must have a minimum of 65 points for you to be invited. But the higher the points, the better for you to be invited to apply for the visa.
Ayun.
So migration. Those are the main distinction between the two. Working visa has an employer already. Skilled migration, you have to find your own employer. You have to find your own work when you arrive in Australia. But again, you are not attached to any employer. For the skilled visa, you're not attached to any employer. So,
ayun, okay. Pero magkaiba po ang proseso nila ng application.
Yes, very much different. It's very different.
Ayan, bago natin i-detalye yung importanteng proseso no sa skilled and working visa no. Ito yung tanong natin kasi ito ay finorward sa ating tanong ng ating sumusubaybay kahapon pa. Ito, how to apply for an Australian working visa and skilled visa. Siguro, isa-isahin po natin, attorney, yung application sa working visa at application sa skilled visa.
Okay, so let's deal with the working visa. In particular, there are two types. The most famous working visas, the 482 visa and the 186 visa. Now, as I've said earlier, these visas fall under the category of employer-sponsored visas, ensuring that upon arrival, they already have the job waiting for them. Now, it was designed to tackle labor shortages, to bring in skilled workers. Again, skilled workers. When employers are unable to find, they cannot find appropriate skilled Australian workers. Kung hindi sila makakahanap ng skilled workers within Australia, then they will look for skilled workers overseas and then they will sponsor them. So, alam ko magtatanong ang iba, saan ba makukuha yung mga employer na yon? Where can I find those employer? Siyempre, salamat sa Google, you can always Google list of accredited sponsors in Australia and you can find the accredited employers who can sponsor your nominated occupation. So, yes.
All right. Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Now, at this, again, baka may magtatanong lahat, pwede ba, can everybody apply for the working visa? My answer is no. Not everybody can apply because the eligibility is contingent upon having skills listed in Australian occupations list. Ibig sabihin, your nominated occupation must be listed in Australian skilled occupations list. Again, magtatanong na naman ng mga tao, saan ko makikita yung skills occupations list? So, for easy reference, you can visit the immigration website, www.immi.gov.au. Those are, you can find the list of skilled occupations list there. So, yeah.
Now, how about the working visa, attorney?
I mean, that's the working visa. That's why we'll discuss that later. Similarly, the skilled visa is also listed in the skilled occupations list. Like I said yesterday, working visas and skilled visas are different. However, may similarity sila kasi both visas are under the Australian skilled occupations list. The only difference is that working visa, may employer ka. May ready job ka na pumasok sa Australia and then you can work straight away. Whereas the skilled migration, you have to find your own employer, although similar pathway, it's in your own. You do not need an employer to come to Australia to sponsor you. So that's the main distinction of the two.
Okay. All right. So ano po yung mga pangunahing dokumento ang ihahanda namin kapag kami ay mag-a-apply ng working and skilled visa in Australia?
Okay. For the working visa, as mentioned earlier, you must have an employer. Hindi lang basta employer. Employer that must be a registered, accredited employer to sponsor the skilled worker. They call it the standard business sponsorship. Hindi ibig sabihin na I have a family member in Australia who has a business, can he sponsor me right away? Wrong. That company must have an approved standard business sponsorship. The working visa is a three-stage process. The SBS, the company must have an approved SBS, and the company must nominate your occupation that is listed on the Australian occupations list. There's a lot of things to take into this, but those are brief only. So 3 stages, the company must have an SBS, the company must nominate your position, and then you apply for the visa. So those are the steps to that.
So ibig sabihin, attorney, kung halimbawa yung narinig ko kanina, kung may kapamilya ako doon sa Australia na merong pinapatakbong negosyo, pero hindi naman po siya nakalista dyan sa ahensya ng gobyerno na pwedeng kumuha ng mga trabahante from the Philippines or anywhere in the world, hindi ka pwedeng i-sponsor niya.
Hindi po. Correct.
Mhm.
That's correct. That company must apply to become an accredited sponsor.
Ayun.
Yeah. Like I said, the list of all accredited sponsor can be found in Department of Immigration website. So that you know whether that company is a legit company sponsoring you.
Mhm. So that
yeah.
is both skilled and working visa list of companies.
No. No. Only for the working visa needs a sponsor.
Okay.
Company sponsor. Only this working visa needs a company sponsor. A skilled visa, you do not need a company sponsor because this is on your own way of coming to Australia.
Mhm.
Your own
Ayun.
credentials will be tested by the Department of Immigration for the skilled migration. But for the working visa, there is an employer who will sponsor you.
Now, attorney, dyan po sa Australia, sa panahon ngayon, ano po ba yung mga in-demand na trabaho o kinukuha ng Australia para magtrabaho po dyan sa bansang Australia? So far, based po sa monitoring ninyo.
Yes, well, based on my experience and based on the companies that that the firm is handling, welders.
So, yung welders fall into skilled?
Both of them fall into skilled and fall under the working visa.
Okay, okay.
So, welders, electricians, butchers, so engineers, there's a lot. It's in the list of the Department of Immigration website.
Opo. Ma'am, attorney, yung welder, yung butcher, at saka yung ano pa yung electrician, kailangan ba ng TESDA, certification?
It requires the company would want to see that they have credentials. Otherwise, they wouldn't. It's like
Pero how about certification from a company here in Manila or here in the Philippines na nagtrabaho sila as electrician sa isang particular na kumpanya, naging welder sila, pero walang TESDA, certification?
Okay. For the purposes of skilled migration, that will not be successful because you need a certificate. You need an evidence that you actually study because you need to have a skills assessment for that portion.
Ayun.
But for the purposes of working visa, some of the employers does not require a certificate, but requires a work experience, a minimum of 2 years work experience that would be sufficient for the employer to sponsor you. But I'm not saying all employers, but if you have the certificate from TESDA, that's a big ticket for you to be sponsored.
Attorney, mahigpit po ba ang evaluation ng mga Australian immigration patungkol sa mga dokumento? Kasi alam mo naman na minsan merong mga, minsan pinipeke ang iba. What I mean, ang point is that mahigpit ba yung evaluation na ginagawa din ng immigration agency sa Australia, attorney?
Yes.
So tinatawagan yun, chine-check yun?
They do check. In the event, for example, that you submitted a document that is false and fraudulent, in the first stage, you may be okay. But in the next level of your visa, you may not be okay because randomly they would check and you would have a record to the Department of Immigration of fraud, and your visa might be canceled anytime soon, and you will say goodbye Australia, go back to the Philippines, and you will be banned coming to Australia for 3 years.
All right. So okay, now attorney, meron po bang time frame? Just what I asked you kahapon sa student visa, meron po bang time frame ang application namin sa under working and skilled visa application?
Okay. For the working visa, the Department of Immigration announced to fast track all this visa, the working visa, because employers really need skilled workers. There is a shortage of skilled workers. Currently, in my experience, the 482 visa, it took 2 months.
Mhm.
In our experience. But like I said, they put a time frame, but at the end of the day, it depends on the workload of the Department of Immigration. It's a case-to-case basis. Like in our experience, we have a 2 months. Some, it took, 6 months, depending on the complexity of the application. But for the skilled migration, it's 8 months to 1.5 years. That is the main.
Naku, matagal.
Matagal kasi wala kang sponsor eh.
Ayun.
And you really have to, it's all your credentials that needs to be tested. Your English tests, your education, your work experience. And the skilled migration also has a 3-stage process, similar to the working visa. When I say skilled migration 3-stage process, you cannot apply for the visa for skilled migration without being invited by the Department of Immigration. You have to apply first for the expression of interest. Then that's the time that when you receive an expression of interest, then that's the only time that you can apply for a visa. That is the reason why it will take a little bit of time to apply for the visa. Then you get the result. Unlike with the working visa, it's a 3-stage process also, but because you do not need to wait for an invitation to apply for the visa, because there is a ready employer willing to sponsor you, to bring you from one country to Australia.
Ayan. Pero sa experience po ninyo, ma'am, sa mga clients po ninyo, gaano tumagal ang kanilang applications po?
For the skilled migration, we have one probably 12 months to 16 months. We have an 8 months who is an onshore. So I really can't tell. I don't want to make any promises to my client that the visa will be granted or will have a decision in 2 months' time if based on my experience. I always say based on my experience.
So what will Ma'am, attorney, what will happen kung sakali na-reject yung application niya? At syempre, nagbayad na siya ng mga proseso. So, hindi na niya yun mababawi pa.
No, you cannot. It's unfortunate that you cannot refund the money. It's unfortunate that you cannot refund the money. The only remedy is, in the event that you are inside Australia and you made an application, you made a visa application inside Australia, and the application has been refused or rejected, then you can make an appeal to the tribunal, an appeal, and in that way you would continue staying in Australia while your matter is being heard to the tribunal, and you can work while you have that, depending on the visa you have.
So ano ba yung sa tingin mo, attorney, yung mga rason bakit nare-reject o nare-refuse ang isang application?
Okay, for the skilled migration visa, in our experience, because some clients would come to you, this is our experience, will come to us if their visa is already in trouble. When I say already in trouble, they already lodged the visa. Now, they claim points higher than what is supposed to be. Because, like I said, the skilled migration is a points-tested visa. If you claim 75 points, and later on the Department of Immigration, upon reviewing the document, the Department of Immigration proves that it's only 65 points. Therefore, your application will be refused. You get the invitation because you have that points. So if you only got 65, you shouldn't get an invite to make an application. So for that is for the skilled migration. And one thing, if the documents are not real, or we call it original fake, being presented by the client to the Department of Immigration. So yeah, so that is room for refusal.
Yes. Attorney, you mentioned earlier about appeal. How long it will take?
Okay, appeal. Experience-wise, depending on the type of visa, for the skilled migration, it would take more than 2 years.
2 years.
More than 2 years.
But you can work.
But you can work depending on the type of visa.
So, nothing to worry, wala. I can still work.
You can still work.
May restriction ba? Meron bang restriction sa akin as a applicant? And then I have an appeal.
If you have an appeal, definitely when you apply for skilled migration, you get the bridging visa A. When you get the bridging visa A, and then the application gets refused, your bridging A will continue for you to stay in Australia. That bridging A is your ticket to stay in Australia. But you cannot leave Australia without making another application, which is a bridging visa B, permission to leave Australia. Because if you leave Australia while you are in appeal without the bridging visa, without the permission to travel overseas, you cannot enter, you cannot return to Australia even if you have an appeal.
Ah, ganon. Okay.
Well, in the event again, Australia is a very, in the event that your application gets refused for the immigration side, you go to an appeal to the tribunal. And if you don't get the right decision, or your application is again rejected, you can appeal to the Federal Court of Australia. So what? It will take how many years again? So sometimes people are using that, for buying time so that they could stay in Australia and, work.
Ayan, okay. So at least klaro po, no? Ito yung tanong, magkano yung ihahanda ng isang applicant in relative to the application of working and skilled visa?
Okay. For the working visa, it's the company must pay and assume all costs.
Okay.
The company will pay for the sponsor and the nomination charges.
So are you saying na walang babayaran yung applicant?
Okay. For the working visa, under the migration law, under the migration regulation, it is the company who must assume all the costs for the standard business sponsorship and the nomination. But for the visa, majority of the sponsor are nice, are kind enough to shoulder the visa application, even though it is not their responsibility. Now, in the event that the sponsor will not shoulder the visa, remember 3-stage: nomination, SBS, nomination, and visa. SBS and nomination, it's an obligation. It is a must on the side of the employer. For the visa application, a sponsor may or may not shoulder. But if the sponsor will not shoulder, the visa application fees $3,035.
Australian dollar.
Australian dollar.
So, and that's equivalent for Philippine peso. Magkano, ma'am?
Say, for example, 35, well, decent. So, 38. 3,035 times 38. So,
yun ang ihahanda.
Yun ang ihahanda for the visa application itself. But you have to consider as well that you have to do the medical health examination.
Correct.
So your ticket.
Correct.
So there are other, NBI. You have to get your NBI.
Yung mga basic requirements.
So that would be for the visa applicant's expense.
Under working visa po yan, ma'am.
Under working visa. But on the skilled migration visa, you have to do your skills assessment depending on your nominated occupation. Minimum skills assessment, minimum 1,100, say for example. English tests, about $300. medical health examination, visa application fee, about 4,000. So those are the government fees that you need to prepare.
Ayan. So, dyan lang po yan. Iba pa yung bayad, iba pa yung mga fees dito sa Philippines.
Iba pa po yung mga fees sa Philippines.
Oo.
Yes.
Sa tingin mo, attorney, aabutin ng 300 to 400 Philippine peso ang pwedeng magastos ng isang applicant?
Possibly yes. Possibly yes. As compared to student visa. That is the reason why, going back to the student visa that we discussed yesterday, the cost would be probably 1.5 to 2 million compared to the skilled migration. I would say if you have the skill, if you have, if you meet your English criteria, if you have the skills assessment done, just go with the skilled migration rather than a student visa.
Ayun. Opo. No. Yes, attorney, 3 minutes lang tayo. Pero ihabol ko itong tanong about the student visa. Kasi tinanong ito kagabi off the air pagkatapos ng ating programa. Pag meron ba akong kapamilya dyan sa Australia, pwede akong i-sponsor?
For the student visa, there's no sponsorship. The family member can only provide assistance when it comes to providing documentations or a statutory declaration or an affidavit saying that I would be willing to accommodate my niece or nephews to stay with me and provide financial capacity of the family member in.
Ayun. All right. Attorney, bukas ipagpapatuloy pa natin ang dalawa pang visa. Now, advice mo po, tips mo po, gabay sa ating mga kababayan na mag-a-apply po ng working and skill visa in Australia. Go ahead, attorney.
Hey, tip. Dapat mag-provide kayo ng tamang dokumento, real, not original fake. Totoong dokumento na ginawa nyo, na nag-aral kayo at English. At kung gusto nyo na mag-apply ngayon, try to do your English. Try to do some research now with whether you are eligible or not, because all these are available in the departmental website. You could check your eligibility. So pretty much everything is in the website of the Department of Immigration.
Ayun. All right. Attorney, please sustain us until tomorrow, kasi we still have tourist and permanent visa. And how are we going to contact you para ma-assist nyo kami? If ever na mag-a-apply kami. Next month, ma-apply ako. Maraming salamat, attorney. Anong oras po ba dyan ngayon sa Australia?
It's 9:29 p.m.
Ng gabi. Okay, so 2 hours ahead pala kayo dyan in Australia.
Yes po.
Ayan. All right. Maraming salamat, Attorney 𝗥𝗱𝗆𝘆, Practitioner, High Court, Australia, as our resource person tonight. Hanggang bukas po, mga kababayan, subaybayan niyo po kami with Attorney 𝗥𝗱𝗆𝗆𝘆 ng Gabito Lawyers, dyan po naman sa bansang Australia. Thank you, Attorney. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Alright, maraming salamat po, mga kababayan. Hanggang bukas, alas 6:30 hanggang alas 7. Ito ang Radyo Advokasya. Ako po si Jude Hicap. Magandang gabi po.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.